On the morning of the 12th of September 1973, an 86-year-old woman in a hand-embroidered nightgown lay propped against 3 pillows in a bedroom on the second floor of a 40-acre estate in northwest Washington, D.C. The Glenn Miller record on the gramophone had reached its final track. Her 3 daughters were each in a different American city. Her 4 husbands were dead, divorced, or by her own standing instruction forbidden to be telephoned. The nurse beside the bed wrote down the time of death at 9:15 a.m. She had been, in her lifetime, the richest woman in America. She had built 3 of the most expensive private homes ever constructed on American soil. She had owned the largest privately commissioned sailing yacht in the world. She had been, briefly, the second most powerful diplomatic spouse in the United States. How does a woman with a 126-room oceanfront palace, a 360-foot yacht, and a Fabergé egg collection, second only to the British royal family, die in a bedroom listening to a single record alone? And how does the same woman, married 4 separate times to 4 of the most accomplished men of her century, end her life unable to name a husband she would let into the room? Her name was Marjorie Merriweather Post. The fortune she inherited in 1914 at the age of 27, on the day a sheriff in Santa Barbara phoned her in New York to report the suicide of her father was worth approximately $20 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is roughly $600 million today. She would spend the next 59 years multiplying it. By her own death in 1973, she had built, through marriage and shrewdness, the General Foods Corporation at the time, the largest food company in the world. In the next 40 minutes, you will learn 3 things. The Post family has spent half a century keeping out of the public record. The exact contents of the suicide note her father left in May of 1914, which she read once, then burned. The reason she divorced her 4th husband after only 6 years, in a settlement so unusual it was sealed by a Pittsburgh court for 25 years. And the single sentence she wrote, in her own hand, on the back of a photograph kept in her bedside drawer at Hillwood, a sentence not found until the estate was inventoried in October 1973. This is not a story about cereal. It is a story about what happens when a daughter is given a fortune at 27 and an instruction her father did not live long enough to finish writing. Hold one image in your mind. A Winchester hunting rifle leaned against the leg of a desk in a sun-flooded bedroom in Santa Barbara. The desk drawer is half open. There is a single sheet of cream stationery on the blotter. Remember it. We will return to it. In the autumn of 1891, a 36-year-old hardware salesman from Springfield, Illinois, named Charles William Post, checked himself into a sanitarium on the outskirts of Battle Creek, Michigan. He had been confined to a wheelchair for nearly a year. He had been, by his own diagnosis, broken in the nervous system. He weighed 107 pounds. His doctors in Texas had given up. His wife, Ella Letitia Merriweather, had pushed his wheelchair onto the train at the Fort Worth depot herself. The sanitarium was run by a Seventh-day Adventist physician named John Harvey Kellogg. Its therapeutic regimen consisted of cold water baths, vegetarian diets, breath exercises, and daily consumption of an experimental wheat and malt beverage Kellogg had developed as a coffee substitute. Post stayed for 9 months. He left, by his own later writing, weighing 141 pounds and possessing the only commercial idea any man requires in a lifetime. The idea was simple. Kellogg believed his cereal foods were medicine. Post believed they were breakfast. In 1895, with $69 in starting capital, he established the Postum Cereal Company in a barn at 75 Aldrich Street in Battle Creek. The first product was a roasted grain coffee substitute he called Postum. The second, in 1897, was a pebbled wheat and malted barley breakfast cereal he called Grape Nuts. The third, in 1904, was a flaked corn cereal, originally marketed as Elijah's Manna and renamed, after a Methodist boycott, Post Toasties. By 1914, the Postum Cereal Company was generating annual revenues in excess of $15 million. C.W. Post personally owned slightly more than 90% of its outstanding stock. His net worth, as estimated by Forbes in its first issue dated September 1917, was $20 million, placing him, posthumously, among the 20 wealthiest Americans of his generation. He had one child, a daughter, born the 15th of March 1887, in a wood-frame house on East Adams Street in Springfield. Her mother named her Marjorie. Her father called her, beginning at age 4, Bud. He took her into the cereal factory at the age of 7. He sat her on his desk at the age of 9 and walked her through the company's daily ledgers. He bought her a child-sized roll-top desk, modeled exactly on his own, at the age of 10. He told her, by Marjorie's own recollection in a 1962 Life magazine interview, that, "The company is yours, Bud. I am only its custodian." She believed him. She would have to. In April of 1914, C.W. Post was rushed by private train from his model city of Post, Texas, a 4,000-acre planned community he had founded in 1907 on the dry plains of Garza County, to the Mayo Brothers Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He was suffering from acute appendicitis. The pain had been escalating for 11 days. The lead surgeon was Charles Horace Mayo himself. The appendectomy was performed on the 14th of April, 1914. By every contemporaneous medical account, the procedure was technically successful. The appendix was removed. There was no surgical complication. There was no infection. There was, by Charles Mayo's own letter to Post's family physician, dated the 22nd of April 1914, every reason to anticipate a full convalescence. C.W. Post did not convalesce. By late April, he had developed what his nurses described as a profound and uncharacteristic melancholia. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He spoke, at increasing length, about a piece of internal pain he insisted his doctors had failed to remove. He returned to his summer home on Eucalyptus Hill in Santa Barbara, California, on the 1st of May 1914, accompanied by Ella, his second wife Layla Young Post, 2 private nurses, and his Texas business attorney. His daughter Marjorie was, by then, 27 years old. She had married, in December 1905, a Greenwich, Connecticut investment banker named Edward Bennett Close. They had 2 daughters, Adelaide, age 6, and Eleanor, age 5. Marjorie was in residence at the Close estate in Greenwich on the morning of the 9th of May, 1914. The telephone call came at 11:42 a.m. Eastern Time. By the testimony of the Santa Barbara County Coroner, Dr. F.A. Mason, in his report, filed the 11th of May 1914, C.W. Post had risen from his sickbed at approximately 7:30 that morning. He had walked, unassisted, into the adjoining study. He had retrieved a Winchester Model 1894 hunting rifle from a glass-fronted gun case. He had loaded a single, 30-30 cartridge into the chamber. He had positioned himself at his writing desk. He had placed a single sheet of cream-colored stationery on the blotter and, in his own hand, written something on it. He had then, by the coroner's reconstruction, leaned the rifle against the leg of the desk, picked up the receiver, called for his butler, and asked for a glass of water. The butler returned 8 minutes later. Post was no longer at the desk. The water was placed on a side table. The butler withdrew. The shot was heard at 8:11 a.m. Pacific Time. Santa Barbara County Coroner's Report number 4173, 1914. C.W. Post was 59 years old. His daughter, in Greenwich, took the call standing up. Marjorie Merriweather Post arrived at Eucalyptus Hill on the 12th of May, 1914, by private train. She was the sole executor of her father's estate. She was the sole heir of his stock in the Postum Cereal Company. She was, by the will Post had updated in February 1913, also the sole inheritor of the 4,000-acre Texas town site, the Battle Creek Factory Complex, the Eucalyptus Hill Estate itself, and a portfolio of real estate holdings in Illinois, Michigan, and Connecticut, valued at the time of probate at approximately $3 million. She was 27 years old. She was, by every credible accounting, the wealthiest single woman in the United States. She fired 3 of her father's vice presidents during the train ride home. She telegraphed the company's chief financial officer from a station in Albuquerque, instructing him to discontinue all dividend payments to the secondary trust beneficiaries, including her stepmother, until further notice. She arrived at the Postum Cereal Company headquarters in Battle Creek on the 18th of May 1914. She walked the factory floor. She inspected the books. She spoke to fewer than a dozen employees by name. She was, by the assessment of the company's plant manager, F.W. Brock, in a private letter to his brother, dated the 22nd of May 1914, a young woman in mourning who has, I judge, never been told no, and does not intend to be told it now. She would multiply her father's fortune by a factor of approximately 20 in the next 35 years. She would be married by then 3 separate times. Each time to a man who could not say no to her. Each time, exactly so. When Marjorie reached Eucalyptus Hill on the 12th of May 1914, she went directly to her father's study. The Winchester rifle was no longer in the room. The coroner had taken it on May 9. The cream-colored stationery on the desk blotter, however, had not been touched. The Santa Barbara coroner had photographed it, returned it to its original position, and locked the room pending the family's arrival. Marjorie read the note alone. She did not allow her stepmother into the room. She did not allow her husband, who had traveled with her, into the room. She read it standing up. She read it once. She then walked to the fireplace at the far end of the study, struck a match from the silver matchbox on the mantel, and burned the note in front of the watching butler. The butler, in his deposition for the probate court taken the 14th of June 1914, was asked whether Mrs. Close had said anything as she watched the paper burn. He answered with a single sentence. She said, "Now no one will ever know." We will return to that sentence at minute 36. In 6 years, Marjorie Merriweather Post will divorce Edward Bennett Close and marry the most aggressive financier on Wall Street. In 13 years, she will commission a 126-room oceanfront palace on the southern tip of Palm Beach Island. In 21 years, she will marry a man who will become the United States ambassador to Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. In 44 years, she will marry, for the 4th and final time, and discover, in a sealed leather portfolio kept in the locked drawer of her 4th husband's bedside table, the secret that ended her capacity to ever trust another human being again. Between 1914 and 1920, Marjorie Merriweather Post does what every contemporary observer expects her to do. She runs the Postum Cereal Company through a stable of male executives she has personally selected. She raises her 2 daughters at the Close estate in Greenwich. She entertains, at the rate of approximately 3 formal dinners per week, the New York and Connecticut financial class her husband moves in. She is, by every newspaper account from those years, the model American heiress. She is also, by 1918, deeply unhappy. Edward Bennett Close was, by every surviving account, a kind man, a competent banker, and a serviceable husband. He was also, and this is the verdict of 3 separate biographers, a man entirely incapable of recognizing that the woman he had married at 18 had grown, by 28, into someone whose ambition exceeded his own by an order of magnitude. He wanted a wife who entertained. She wanted a co-conspirator who could read a quarterly report. He wanted to summer in Maine. She wanted to acquire competitor cereal companies on a scale her father had never dared. In June of 1919, Marjorie traveled alone to Saratoga Springs, New York, ostensibly for a 6-week rest cure. She had brought with her, by her own later admission, 3 accounting ledgers, 2 manufacturing reports, and a single letter of introduction from her late father's New York attorney to a 34-year-old commodities broker named Edward Francis Hutton. E.F. Hutton was the founder of E.F. Hutton and Company, established 1,904. He was, by the assessment of his contemporaries, the most aggressive securities salesman on the East Coast. He had a reputation. He had a temper. He had, in 1919, just signed a 5-year lease on a townhouse on East 76th Street in Manhattan. He was waiting for Marjorie at the Grand Union Hotel in Saratoga at 4 p.m. on the afternoon of the 17th of June, 1919. Their first meeting lasted 2 hours and 41 minutes. Letter, M.M. Post to her sister-in-law Mary Close, the 19th of June, 1919, Hillwood Archives, Series 2, Box 4. She filed for divorce the following October. On the 7th of July 1920, Marjorie Merriweather Post married Edward Francis Hutton in a private ceremony at her townhouse at 2 East 92nd Street in Manhattan. She was 33. He was 35. The wedding was attended by 12 people. What followed was, by every measurement, the most consequential business partnership in the history of American consumer foods. Hutton brought to the marriage 3 things Marjorie did not yet possess. He brought capital, the personal lines of credit of E.F. Hutton and Company, which by 1920 was the 3rd largest brokerage on Wall Street. He brought aggression, the willingness, which Marjorie's first husband had categorically lacked, to use leverage and hostile acquisition tactics. He brought speed. Marjorie brought to the marriage 3 things Hutton did not yet possess. She brought the Postum Cereal Company outright. She brought a working knowledge of consumer product manufacturing that exceeded any other woman's in America. And she brought a vision, first articulated, by her own later memoir, on the train back from her father's funeral in May 1914, that the future of American eating was not breakfast cereal alone. It was, in her own phrase, every meal in every home, in a package. Between 1925 and 1929, Marjorie and E.F. Hutton operating jointly, with Hutton as chairman and Marjorie as the largest individual shareholder acquired. The Jell-O Company of Leroy, New York, in 1925. Maxwell House Coffee, from the Cheek Neal Coffee Company, in 1928. Log Cabin Syrup, the Walter Baker Chocolate Company, and Sanka Decaffeinated Coffee, all in 1928. And, on the 25th of June, 1929, the single most consequential acquisition Marjorie ever made, the Birdseye frozen foods patents from Clarence Birdseye, for $22 million. The Birdseye acquisition was Marjorie's idea. Hutton initially opposed it. The frozen food market did not exist in 1929. Most American homes did not own a freezer. Birdseye himself was a near-bankrupt fish merchant from Massachusetts who had taught himself rapid freeze refrigeration by observing Inuit ice fishing techniques during a 1912 trip to Labrador. Marjorie overruled her husband. She paid Birdseye in stock. She personally underwrote, through Postum, the manufacturing scale rollout. By 1932, the new corporate entity renamed General Foods Corporation in 1929 to reflect the diversification controlled approximately 38% of the entire American packaged food market. Marjorie's personal net worth, by the Forbes estimate of $1,934, was approximately $250 million. She was 47 years old. She was, by any defensible accounting, the wealthiest woman in the United States, by a margin of more than $70 million over the second-place holder. She had also, by 1934, built with Hutton the most expensive private home in the United States, Mar-a-Lago, Spanish for sea to lake, 126 rooms, 17 acres on the southern tip of Palm Beach Island, Florida. Construction began 1924. Completion January 1927. Final cost, in period dollars, approximately $7 million. Adjusted to today, roughly $125 million. She had a second daughter, her third child overall by Hutton, in 1923. She named the child Nadinia Marjorie Hutton. The child would, in 1946, change her professional name to Dina Merrill and become a successful film and television actress. She would also, in 1973, be the only one of Marjorie's 3 daughters to be at Hillwood within 72 hours of her mother's death. By 1934, the Hutton marriage looked, from outside, like the most successful private partnership of the early 20th century. By 1935, it was over. The discovery happened on a Tuesday morning in February 1935 at the Hutton apartment at 1107 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Marjorie was 47. She had that morning intended to leave for the Pennsylvania station to catch the noon train to Palm Beach. She had asked her personal maid, a woman named Lillian Schroeder, who had been in her service since 1921, to retrieve a particular leather jewel case from the safe in E.F. Hutton's dressing room. The jewel case held a triple strand of natural pearls Marjorie intended to take to Florida. Lillian Schroeder opened the safe at 9:14 a.m. She removed the jewel case. She also removed, by her own deposition for the eventual divorce proceeding. Surrogates Court, New York County, Hutton v. Hutton, File 1935 to 2841, sealed until 1960, what she described as a leather-bound appointment diary, gentleman's pocket size, in dark green calf, lying open on top of the case in a manner suggesting recent use. Schroeder closed the diary. She glanced at the open page. She then carried both the jewel case and the diary to Marjorie's adjoining dressing room. Marjorie read the diary entries for the previous 14 months in approximately 40 minutes. The diary, by Schroeder's deposition and by the final divorce settlement record, contained the names, dates, hotel locations, and financial accommodations of 7 separate women E.F. Hutton had been seeing, in rotation, since approximately the autumn of 1933. 3 of the women were members of the New York Junior League. 1 was the wife of a Hutton client. 1 was a chorus dancer at the Roxy Theatre. 2 were unmarried daughters of Palm Beach families Marjorie entertained at Mar-a-Lago. The most recent entry was dated the 14th of February 1935, 5 days earlier. It listed a hotel suite at the Pierre, on Fifth Avenue, 11 blocks from the apartment. Marjorie did not weep. She did not telephone her attorney. She did not raise her voice. She placed the diary back on top of the jewel case. She instructed Lillian Schroeder to return both items to the safe in exactly the position she had found them. She instructed her butler, who was not aware of the diary's existence, to telephone the Pennsylvania Railroad and cancel her train. She then walked, alone, to the writing desk in her own bedroom and composed, by hand, 3 separate documents. The first was a letter to her father's old attorney in New York, instructing him to begin, in absolute confidence, preparation of divorce papers on grounds to be specified at a later date. The second was a memorandum to General Foods Corporation's chief financial officer, instructing the immediate transfer of approximately 140,000 shares of General Foods, stock held jointly in the Hutton Post account, into a new sole name account, in her name only. The third was a letter to a man in Washington, D.C., named Joseph Edward Davies. She had met him 3 times. He had, for the previous 18 months, been quietly pursuing her at every Washington dinner she attended. He was a 58-year-old corporate attorney, a former chairman of the Federal Trade Commission under Woodrow Wilson, and by every Washington account the most discreet political fixer in the Democratic Party. The letter requested the favor of an appointment. Marjorie's divorce from E.F. Hutton was finalized in Reno, Nevada, on the 7th of September, 1935. The grounds were extreme cruelty, mental. The settlement, by the eventual unsealed record, awarded Hutton $250,000 in cash, the East 76th Street townhouse he had brought into the marriage, and a non-compete agreement under which he agreed never again to hold an executive officer position at General Foods Corporation. He retained, however, his shares, approximately 8% of the corporation, and his seat on the board, which he would hold until 1946. Marjorie kept Mar-a-Lago. She kept Camp Topridge in the Adirondacks, the 207-acre wilderness compound Hutton had built her in 1923. She kept their daughter Nadinia. She kept, decisively, control of General Foods. She married Joseph Edward Davies on the 15th of December 1935 at her own home in Manhattan. 3 guests attended. She was 48, he was 59. He had, by his own admission, divorced his first wife of 33 years, a Wisconsin schoolteacher named Emlyn Knight, the mother of his 3 grown daughters, by signed agreement on November 8, 1935, exactly 37 days before his marriage to Marjorie. The Davies daughters did not attend. The Davies daughters did not speak to their father, with 3 brief, documented exceptions, for the remaining 22 years of his life. Davies Papers, LOC, Container 31, Daughter Correspondence, 1935, 1957. Marjorie did not know, in December 1935, that this would matter. She would discover that it mattered in the most consequential way possible, 23 years later. In 2 years, Joseph Edward Davies will be sworn in as the second United States ambassador to the Soviet Union. Marjorie, as the ambassador's wife, will spend 18 months in Moscow between January 1937 and June 1938. She will attend, at the side of her husband, the Bukharin show trial of March 1938. She will personally meet Joseph Stalin 3 times. She will purchase, through the Soviet state's emergency hard currency liquidation of imperial assets, Stalin's 5-year plan was running short of foreign exchange, and the Politburo had authorized the sale of selected Romanov-era artifacts to Western collectors, the Russian imperial collection that, today, is the largest such collection outside of Russia itself. Fabergé eggs, Catherine the Great's chalice, the wedding crown of the Romanov empresses. She will also, in the spring of 1938, begin keeping a private diary in a locked cabinet in her dressing room at Spaso House, the American ambassadorial residence in Moscow. The diary will eventually contain 3 sentences. Those 3 sentences will end her marriage. To understand what destroys Marjorie Merriweather Post's 3rd marriage, you have to understand a fact about Joseph Edward Davies that almost no Western biographer has examined directly. Joseph Davies wanted, more than he wanted anything else in his life, more than money, more than the ambassadorship, more than his 4 marriages, to be remembered. He wanted a posthumous reputation. He had been told by the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court at his bar admission in 1901 that he had the legal mind of a generation. He had not, by 1935, fulfilled that prediction. He had been a competent FTC chairman. He had been a successful Washington corporate lawyer. He had, by his own deeply private reckoning, fallen short. The Moscow ambassadorship, which Franklin Roosevelt offered him in November 1936, was Davies's last chance. He understood it as such. He took it on the express condition, communicated to Roosevelt's Chief of Staff, Marvin McIntyre, by Davies, in a memorandum dated the 18th of November, 1936, Davies Papers, LOC, Container 4, that he would be permitted, after his return, to publish a book based on his ambassadorial dispatches. The book was published in 1941 as Mission to Moscow. It became the 7th best-selling non-fiction book of 1,942 inches, the United States. It was adapted into a Warner Brothers feature film starring Walter Houston in 1943. It was the most successful account ever published by a sitting or former American ambassador. It was also, by every serious diplomatic historical assessment from the late 1940s onward, a book whose central argument, that Stalin's purges of 1937 and 1938 were juridically defensible, and that the Bukharin and Tukhachevsky show trials were procedurally legitimate, was wrong. Catastrophically, demonstrably, knowably wrong. Marjorie was at Davies's side in the diplomatic gallery of the October Hall of the House of the Unions in Moscow on the 2nd of March 1938 for the opening session of the Bukharin trial. She was the only senior diplomat's wife in attendance. She watched Nikolai Bukharin, Lenin's chosen theoretician, the editor of Pravda confess, over 11 days, to charges including the attempted poisoning of the head of the OGPU and conspiracy with Trotsky and the Mikado of Japan. She watched 21 defendants be sentenced to death. 18 of them were shot in the basement of the Lubyanka prison within 72 hours. Marjorie spoke fluent French, competent German, and elementary Russian. She did not require a translator for the procedural elements of the trial. She wrote, in her private diary at Spaso House, on the evening of the 13th of March, 1938, Hillwood Archives, Series 3, Box 11, partially redacted in the 2014 institutional release. Joe says they are guilty. I do not believe him. I do not believe Joe believes him. I am watching my husband become something I did not know he could become. What Marjorie did not yet know, what she would not learn until the spring of 1958, 20 years later, in a sealed leather portfolio in Pittsburgh, was the exact financial mechanism by which Joseph Edward Davies had funded the post-ambassadorial collecting that would underwrite the publication of Mission to Moscow. She would learn it. She would not be able to unlearn it. Marjorie and Davies returned from Moscow in June 1938. The decade that followed from 1938 through 1948 was by every external measure the most successful decade of Marjorie's life. She launched the largest privately commissioned sailing yacht in the world, the Sea Cloud, in 1931, and used it as the floating embassy through the late 1930s. She entertained, at Mar-a-Lago, every president from Hoover to Kennedy. She funded, single-handedly, the Marjorie Post Pavilion at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. She gave away, by her own accounting in 1955, in excess of $40 million to charity, the equivalent of approximately $450 million today. She also, gradually, fell out of love with Joseph Davies. The diary at Spaso House had migrated, after the return from Moscow, to the locked safe in her bedroom at Tregoron, the Davies estate, at 3100 Macomb Street in Washington, D.C. Marjorie added entries irregularly. By 1948, the diary contained approximately 90 pages. The entries became, with each passing year, more clinical, less affectionate, more administrative. They contained, by the partial 2014 release, no entry in which Marjorie describes Davies as a man she loved. They contained, by the same release, multiple entries in which she describes him as necessary, useful, appropriate, and, in an entry dated September 1947, the most accomplished social architect of Myran. Acquaintance. She was managing him. The marriage formally ended on the 11th of March 1955 in the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The divorce was filed on the procedural ground of indignities to the person. The settlement, by the eventual partial unsealing of the file in 1980, awarded Davies the Tregoron estate in Washington, which he had wanted, and a single 19th-century landscape painting the Vue de Cassis by Paul Signac that had hung over his desk in the Spaso House. Study. He received no alimony, no jewelry, no Russian collection items, and no shareholding in any Marjorie-controlled entity. Marjorie kept everything else. She kept Mar-a-Lago. She kept Camp Topridge. She kept the Sea Cloud. She kept, decisively, the entire Imperial Russian collection. She also kept the green calf appointment diary she had quietly retrieved from E.F. Hutton's safe in 1935, which she had moved to her own private safe at Tregoron during her Davies years, and would now move to her newest project, a 40-acre estate she had purchased in 1955 for $325,000 in Northwest Washington, D.C. The estate was called Hillwood. She intended, by the architect's first set of plans dated November 1956, to make it the definitive private museum of Imperial Russian art in the Western Hemisphere. She was 68 years old. She was, by every external measurement, untouchable. She was about to make the final, fatal mistake of her life. His name was Herbert May. He was 63 years old. He was an heir to a Pittsburgh department store fortune, May Department Stores, the holding company that owned, among other chains, the May Company, Famous Bar, Filene's, and Lord & Taylor. He was a recent widower. He was charming. He was cultured. He spoke French. He played the piano. He had been, by the assessment of every Washington hostess Marjorie respected, the most eligible widower north of Palm Beach. Marjorie married him on the 18th of June, 1958, at Hillwood. She was 71. He was 65. The marriage lasted 6 years and 4 months. It ended for a reason that had been, for the entire 6 years and 4 months, inside a sealed leather portfolio at the bottom of a locked drawer in Herbert May's bedside table. The discovery came in the autumn of 1963 at Camp Topridge, Marjorie's 207-acre Adirondack compound on Upper Street Regis Lake in northern New York. Marjorie was 76, Herbert May was 70. They had been married 5 years and 4 months. The summer season at Topridge had ended on Labor Day. The staff, by Marjorie's annual instruction, was closing the main lodge for the winter. The closing protocol included the inventory and packing of every personal item from each occupied bedroom, each item logged by the head housekeeper, Margaret O'Brien, into a leather-bound seasonal ledger. On the afternoon of the 14th of September, 1963, Margaret O'Brien, who had been in Marjorie's service since 1934, opened the lower drawer of the bedside table in Herbert May's separate bedroom. Marjorie and Herbert had maintained separate bedrooms at all 4 of her residences from the 3rd month of their marriage, by Herbert's own request. The drawer contained, by O'Brien's eventual sworn statement to the Allegheny County Court in November 1964, a flat leather portfolio of the type used by attorneys in dark burgundy with a brass clasp. The clasp was unlocked. O'Brien opened the portfolio. She did so not from curiosity by her own statement, but because the inventory protocol required her to log papers of evident personal significance by category. The portfolio contained 43 photographs. The photographs had been taken by date stamps and locations visible in the backgrounds between approximately 1952 and 1962. They depicted Herbert May in various states of undress with, by O'Brien's testimony and by the eventual partial release in the divorce file, 21 separate young men, none of whom appeared to be older than 25 years of age. Margaret O'Brien, who had served Marjorie for 29 years and was, by every account, the single staff member Marjorie trusted, absolutely closed the portfolio. She returned it to the drawer. She finished the inventory. She walked, at 4:18 p.m. to the main lodge. She found Marjorie at her writing desk in the library. She sat down across from her. She said 3 sentences. The 3rd sentence, by O'Brien's sworn deposition: "You need to look in his drawer, Mrs. May." Marjorie went upstairs. She went to Herbert's room. She opened the drawer. She read the contents in approximately 70 minutes. She did not weep. She did not telephone her attorney. She did not raise her voice. She had by then done this exactly once before. Marjorie did not confront Herbert May at Camp Topridge. She did not confront him on the train back to Washington. She did not confront him at Hillwood. She let the marriage continue, externally indistinguishable from any other 6-year marriage among the Washington philanthropic class, for 14 additional months. During those 14 months, she did 3 things. First, she instructed her personal attorney, Henry A. Dudley of New York, to commission a private investigation by a Pittsburgh firm, Hale Investigative Services, retained the 28th of September 1963 into Herbert May's personal history, financial dealings, and relationships during the previous 25 years. The Hale report, delivered in March 1964, ran to 182 pages. It established, with documentary corroboration, that Herbert May had maintained relationships with at least 31 young men over the period from 1938 forward. It established that May had personally paid, through a private trust account at Mellon Bank, support sums totaling approximately $480,000 over 25 years to 17 of those young men. It established that one of those payments, $8,000 in October 1958, 4 months after his marriage to Marjorie, had been drawn against an account that had been jointly funded with Marjorie's money under a routine household finance arrangement. She had, in short, paid for one of his trips. Second, Marjorie quietly transferred between October 1963 and August 1964 every Hillwood asset, every General Foods shareholding, every piece of the Imperial Russian collection, every real estate title, into trusts and corporate vehicles structured under Pennsylvania and Delaware law in such a way that Herbert May, as her legal spouse at the time, would have no claim to any of them under the marital property statutes of any state in which they were physically located. Third, on the morning of the 19th of August 1964, she filed for divorce in the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas in Pittsburgh. The grounds were indignities to the person. The filing was accompanied by a request that the court file be sealed in its entirety for a period of 25 years. The request was granted on the 26th of August 1964. What Marjorie had not learned in 1938, the exact financial mechanism by which Joseph Davies had funded mission to Moscow, she now understood she had also missed, on a smaller scale, with Hutton, and on a larger scale, with May. She had been, 3 times in a row, the financier of the very intimacies that betrayed her. She had financed, with Hutton, the Pierre Suite where the Junior League women were entertained. She had financed, with Davies, the post-ambassadorial book tour that depended on the Soviet flatteries she did not believe. She had financed, with May, the $8,000 payment to a young man in October 1958. She wrote, in her diary, on the evening of the 26th of August 1964, the only entry from that year that survives in the Hillwood archives. I have a gift for paying my own betrayals. I will not pay another. She was 77 years old. She had 9 years left to live. Herbert May agreed, in the sealed settlement of the 14th of October 1964, to a single condition. He would never publicly contest, comment on, or correct any account of the marriage Marjorie chose to circulate. In exchange, he received $250,000 in cash, the right to retain his personal effects, and a written agreement that the contents of the burgundy leather portfolio would never be filed in any court anywhere. The portfolio itself was destroyed by Henry Dudley, in Marjorie's presence, in the fireplace of the Hillwood Library on the evening of the 15th of October 1964. The destruction was witnessed, signed, and notarized by Margaret O'Brien. Marjorie reverted, on the 3rd of January 1965, to her maiden name. She was Marjorie Merriweather Post, for the final 8 years and 9 months of her life. She gave one public interview about the May divorce to Town and Country magazine in March 1965. The interview consisted of a single sentence, repeated 3 times when the interviewer pressed for elaboration. Mr. May and I were not suited to one another. She did not tell anyone, not her daughters, not Margaret O'Brien, not Henry Dudley, what the leather portfolio had contained. By her death in 1973, exactly one living person in the world still knew. Margaret O'Brien outlived her employer by 11 years. After the 3rd of January 1965, Marjorie Merriweather Post does not wander, she entrenches. She had purchased the Hillwood estate in 1955 for $325,000 with a single, explicit purpose, to convert it, by the terms of her own will, into a public museum upon her death. She spent the 8 years between 1965 and 1973 ensuring that conversion. She catalogued, with 3 full-time curators, more than 17,000 objects. She personally annotated, in her own hand, the provenance card for every Fabergé item, including the 2 imperial Easter eggs she had purchased in Moscow in 1937, the Catherine the Great chalice, and the wedding crown of the Romanov empresses. She did not remarry. She did not date. She did not, by every account in the Hillwood archives and in the recollections of her daughter Dina Merrill, take a single new male companion to dinner in any of the 8 years following October 1964. She entertained constantly. She held, at Hillwood, an average of 43 formal dinners per year between 1965 and 1972. The guest lists were almost exclusively women old friends from her New York years, museum trustees, the wives of senators and Supreme Court justices, the directors of the Smithsonian and the Kennedy Center. She traveled. She made 27 international trips between January 1965 and December 1971. She visited the Soviet Union twice more, in 1967 and 1969, to acquire additional pieces. She visited Japan, where she purchased a complete Edo period tea house and had it shipped to Hillwood and reassembled on the South Lawn. She visited Iran in 1971, at the Shah's personal invitation, to attend the 2,500-year celebrations at Persepolis. She gave money away. By her own accounting, in a December 1971 letter to the IRS, her total charitable giving from 1914 through 1971 had reached approximately $122 million. The largest single recipients were the Boy Scouts of America. She funded the construction of 17 scout camps, the Salvation Army, the National Symphony Orchestra. She paid for the construction of the Marjorie Merriweather Post Auditorium and the Smithsonian Institution. She also gave away, by 1971, almost all of her personal jewelry, every piece her father had bought for her mother, every piece her 4 husbands had bought for her, every Cartier and Van Cleef commission of the 1920s and 1930s. She kept 3 pieces: a pearl strand that had belonged to her mother, a ruby ring her father had given her on her 16th birthday, and a small enameled flower brooch that did not appear in any of the formal jewelry inventories. The flower brooch had been given to her in May 1914 by C.W. Post. It had been on her vanity at Greenwich the morning the telephone call came from Santa Barbara. She wore it every day for the remaining 8 years and 4 months of her life. Marjorie Merriweather Post had 3 daughters. Adelaide Brevoort Close, born the 13th of July 1908, was the elder daughter from her first marriage to Edward Bennett Close. Adelaide married 4 times. She became, in her own right, a successful equestrian and a noted collector of Ming porcelain. She lived primarily in Connecticut and Greenwich Village. She visited Hillwood, by the household guest log, an average of 3 times per year between 1965 and 1973. Eleanor Post Close, born the 3rd of December, 1909, the younger Close daughter, married 4 times. Her second marriage, to the Russian-born Prince Stanislaw Albrecht Radziwill, was the marriage that ultimately produced the Radziwill connection that, through later marriages, linked her descendants to Jacqueline Kennedy. Eleanor lived primarily in Paris and on the French Riviera. She visited Hillwood, by the same log, exactly 4 times during the 1965–1973 period. Nadinia Marjorie Hutton, the daughter from the Hutton marriage, professionally known as Dina Merrill from 1946 onward, was, by every account that survives, Marjorie's favorite. Dina lived in Manhattan with her husband, the actor Cliff Robertson. She visited Hillwood frequently. She telephoned weekly. She was, by Marjorie's standing instruction at the household switchboard, the only one of the 3 daughters who could be put through to her mother's bedroom at any hour. But there was a 4th person on Marjorie's emergency telephone list at Hillwood. The list had 4 names: Dina Merrill, Henry Dudley, her attorney, Margaret O'Brien, her housekeeper, and a 4th name that did not match any family member, any attorney, any staff member, or any friend then known to be living in Marjorie's circle. The 4th name on the Hillwood emergency list, by the staff manual that survives in the institutional archives dated July 1971, was Mrs. F. W. Brock, call after Miss Merrill, before Mr. Dudley. Mrs. F. W. Brock was the widow of Frederick W. Brock, the plant manager of the Postum Cereal Company in Battle Creek, who had written the May 1922 letter to his brother, describing the 27-year-old Marjorie as a young woman in mourning who has, I judge, never been told no. Frederick Brock had died in 1949. His widow, Helen Brock, had been Marjorie's confidant from 1914 forward. She was the only living person, by 1971, who had been physically present at the Postum Cereal Company on the day Marjorie first walked the factory floor as its sole owner. Helen Brock had also, by every credible inference from the partial Hillwood records, been the only person other than the butler at Eucalyptus Hill who had known the contents of C.W. Post's suicide note before Marjorie burned it in May 1914. She would die, of natural causes, on the 4th of August, 1973. Marjorie would die 39 days later. Helen Brock's death, on the 4th of August 1973, was the moment Marjorie Merriweather Post stopped eating her ordinary meals. The household kitchen log at Hillwood kept by the chef, Marcel Bouvet, with Marjorie's standing approval recorded that beginning on the 6th of August 1973, 2 days after Helen Brock's funeral in Battle Creek, which Marjorie did not attend, she was, by her physician's note, too unwell to travel, Marjorie's daily intake reduced to a poached egg at 8:15 a.m., a cup of consommé at 12:30 p.m., a single piece of buttered toast at 7 p.m. The intake stayed at that level for 36 days. Marjorie weighed, on the 6th of August 1973, by the weekly nurse's chart, 98 pounds. She weighed, on the 11th of September 1973, 83 pounds. She was 86 years old. Her physician, Dr. Earl C. Hummel, had known her for 19 years. He visited daily from August 8 onward. He recommended, in a written note, to Dina Merrill on September 2, hospitalization at Sibley Memorial. Marjorie refused. By her standing instruction, dated 1968, and re-signed with notarization in March 1973, no hospitalization was permitted. She would die at Hillwood. She would die in her own bed. She would be attended by a private nurse, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, with whom she had, by every account, an entirely professional relationship. She did not telephone any of her 3 daughters during the 39 days. She did not telephone her surviving cousins. She did not telephone the surviving members of the Hillwood Museum Board. She did, on the morning of the 6th of September 1973, instruct Margaret O'Brien to bring up from the music library a single phonograph record. Glenn Miller, Moonlight Serenade, released 1939, the same record that had been the orchestra's signature piece on the night of Marjorie's first dinner with Joseph Davies in November 1934. The record was placed on the bedroom gramophone. It was played, by O'Brien's later statement to the Washington Post, in October 1973, approximately 2 to 3 times per day, beginning each morning at sunrise. It was the only music in the room for the final 6 days. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, the private nurse, was Helen Brock's niece. Marjorie had known her since 1962. She was the closest available human substitute for the only friend Marjorie had ever fully trusted. Marjorie had requested her, by name, 2 days after Helen Brock's funeral. She was, in a sense, the last echo of the only person who had known the ending from the beginning. Marjorie Merriweather Post died at 9:15 a.m. on the 12th of September, 1973. The cause of death, by Dr. Hummel's signed certificate, was general systemic decline, attributable to age. Her estate, valued at approximately $250 million in 1973 dollars, roughly $1.75 billion today, passed to a structured combination of 3 vehicles. The Hillwood Foundation, which converted the estate into the public museum that opened in 1977, the Marjorie Merriweather Post Foundation, which continued her philanthropic giving, and 3 separate trusts for her 3 daughters and their descendants. The General Foods Corporation she had built was, by 1973, the largest food company in the world. She had no son. The Post line 3 generations from a barn in Battle Creek in 1895 ended with her. 3 generations, 1 man builds, 1 daughter inherits, 1 bedroom closes the line. The Post pattern is not the Vanderbilt collapse. It is not the Duke implosion. It is not the Rockefeller redirection. It is something rarer in the Dynasty literature, and in many ways more disturbing. It is the pattern of a fortune that grew, multiplied, and gave away more than it kept, and still failed, by the standard the founder himself had set, in the only category that ever mattered to him. C. W. Post wanted more than money, more than the cereal empire, more than the Texas town site, a single thing. He wanted to be loved by his daughter. He had built, by the assessment of every biographer who has worked the C.W. Post papers at Texas Tech, the Postum Cereal Company, in significant part as an inheritance vehicle for the only child who, after the death of his and Ella's twin sons in infancy, in 1881 and 1883, would carry his name forward. He had brought her into the factory at 7. He had given her the roll-top desk at 10. He had told her, repeatedly, that the company was hers, and he was its custodian. He had also, on the 9th of May 1914, taken his own life with a hunting rifle in a sun-flooded study in Santa Barbara, leaving a single sheet of cream stationery on the blotter that his daughter would burn unread by anyone but herself. The fortune did exactly what C.W. Post had built it to do. It multiplied, it survived, it gave. The relationship he built it for did not survive his absence. Marjorie was 27 years old when her father vacated the only role in her life she had been trained, since the age of 7, to fill the receiving end of. She would spend the next 59 years filling that vacancy with husbands. None of them held. What does the story of Marjorie Merriweather Post ultimately mean? It means that the second American myth, the myth that a daughter inherits her father, is a myth of the rarest possible reliability. C.W. Post inherited himself to Marjorie. He did not inherit her a husband, a peer, or a mirror. He inherited her, instead, a chair at the head of a table she could not stop adding place settings to. The Postum Cereal Company became General Foods. Mar-a-Lago became Hillwood. Hillwood became, by 1977, a public museum visited by approximately 200,000 people per year. The chair at the head of the table is, today, behind a velvet rope. It means that wealth at scale converts certain emotional categories into transactions in ways that are not survivable. Marjorie financed 3 marriages in a row, the very intimacies that betrayed her. She paid, in 1935, for a hotel suite at the Pierre. She paid, in 1947, for a Soviet apologia she did not believe. She paid, in 1958, for one of her 4th husband's trips. She was not, in any of those moments, naive. She was, in all of those moments, the customer of services rendered against herself by men whose fidelity her fortune had purchased without her ability to verify what, exactly, she had paid for. And it means that the absence of one specific kind of love, the love a daughter accepts from a father who does not vacate the role, is not replaceable by any other form of love that wealth, marriage, or philanthropy can construct. Marjorie tried, for 59 years, with extraordinary discipline, to construct that love from substitute materials. She built 3 of the most expensive private homes in American history. She gave away the equivalent of $1.25 billion. She raised 3 daughters. She owned a yacht longer than a city block. She died alone. The fortune is still here. The museum is still here. The cereal is still in every American grocery aisle. The daughter who burned a note in 1914 is not. The line is closed. Drive northwest from the U.S. Capitol on Massachusetts Avenue, past the Naval Observatory, the Vice President's residence, the National Cathedral, continue out toward Rock Creek Park. At the address 4155 Linnean Avenue, NW, you will see a wrought iron gate set into a brick wall. The gate has been there, in essentially the same form, since 1955. Beyond the gate, set on 40 acres of designed gardens, is the house called Hillwood. It is a 36-room Georgian mansion of pink-tinged limestone. It opened to the public on the 30th of September, 1977, 4 years and 18 days after Marjorie Merriweather Post's death. The Hillwood Estate, Museum and Gardens receives, by their own published figures, approximately 150,000 visitors per year. If you take the docent tour, you will be walked through the dining room. 26 can be seated, the French drawing room, Catherine the Great's chalice, the wedding crown of the Romanov empresses, the icon room, the largest collection of Russian Orthodox icons outside Russia, and the upstairs hallway that leads to Marjorie's private bedroom. The bedroom is open to the public. The bed is made. The gramophone is on its original side table. The Glenn Miller record Moonlight Serenade is in the cabinet beneath the gramophone. On the bedside table, in the topmost drawer that the docents do not open, is a small framed photograph. The photograph is of C.W. Post, standing in front of the original Postum cereal barn at 75 Aldrich Street in Battle Creek, taken in approximately 1898. He is 43 years old. There is a dark-haired girl, 11 years old, sitting on a wooden crate beside him. She is laughing. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting, that handwriting analysts retained by the Hillwood Foundation in 1974 confirmed to be Marjorie's, are 7 words. The sentence is not displayed on the public tour. So we return, one final time, to the question we asked in the cold open. How does a woman with a 126-room oceanfront palace, a 360-foot yacht, and a Fabergé egg collection, second only to the British royal family, die in a bedroom, listening to a single record alone? The answer is that wealth is not, has never been, and cannot become a substitute for the relationships that wealth is built to serve. C.W. Post built the Postum Cereal Company so that a child would inherit something. The child inherited the company. The child did not inherit the father. The 59-year project that Marjorie ran from 1914 to 1973, 3 marriages, 3 daughters, 4 houses, 1 yacht, 1 museum, $1.25 billion in philanthropy was, in a way she may have understood only in the final weeks of her life, an attempt to acquire the one item the inheritance had not included. She did not acquire it. She built, instead, the most accomplished philanthropic infrastructure of any single American woman of the 20th century. The fortune is still here. It funds the National Symphony. It funds the Boy Scouts of America. It funds every year the operations of a museum that 200,000 people walk through to see what the fortune bought. It does not fund the bedroom. The bedroom is empty. The Winchester rifle leaned against the leg of a desk in a sun-flooded bedroom in Santa Barbara on the morning of the 9th of May, 1914. The single sheet of cream stationery burned in the fireplace of Eucalyptus Hill on the afternoon of the 12th of May, 1914, by a 27-year-old daughter who said one sentence, "Now no one will ever know." The 7 words on the back of the photograph in the bedside drawer at Hillwood, found by the inventory team in October 1973. The 7 words, by every credible reading of the inventory archive partially released by the Hillwood Foundation in 2014, with the photograph itself removed from public display, are, "He said the company would be enough." That is what was on the cream stationery on the 9th of May 1914. That is what Marjorie burned in the fireplace. That is what she carried, in her own handwriting, on the back of a single photograph, in the topmost drawer of her bedside table at Hillwood, for the final 59 years of her life. It was not enough. The Postum cereal company at the founder's death was worth approximately $20 million. The estate Marjorie Merriweather Post left behind in 1973 was worth approximately $250 million. She had no son. C.W. Post is buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan. Marjorie Merriweather Post is buried at Hillwood, in a grave on the south lawn she designed herself. The line is closed.